So there is one upgrade that you can do on your bike that's fairly affordable, that's gonna make you a faster but also a safer rider, and that's your tire setup. See, a lot of people buy either the wrong pattern for where they ride, perhaps the wrong casing for the type of riding they like to do, or simply use the wrong tire pressure. So let's talk about it and let's fix it. Your tire choice is a key part of your bike setup. Why? Because the tires is the only component of the bike that is actually in contact with the ground. It is essentially an extension of your suspension, and it has a direct impact on your speed, your confidence, your safety, but also your comfort. As you can see, I'm sponsored by Maxxis tires, and I've been working with the brand for quite a few years. In my videos, I've been talking about tread pattern, tire casing, but also pressure in order to help you find the best setup. But today, and in this video, to give you the best information, I am joined by Sean from Maxxis Tire. So Sean, what do you do for Maxxis?
I do tire design and development, so everything from sketching the initial 2D concepts on paper to working with the pros and making sure that we have the best product available.
And what happened here?
Little real-world testing, riding some 32-inch prototypes.
Okay, well, and you are currently in Squamish because you're heading to Crankworks for the launch of the new DHX. You played a huge part in developing that tire. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but the reason why I wanted to link up with you was to get all the information about tires so people at home, including myself, can make sure we pick up the right tire for the type of riding we're about to do. So let's dive into it. So what are the steps to pick up the right tire?
First thing you're going to want to do is find the general category of tires that's appropriate for your bike. So if you have an XC bike, the tire selection is going to be vastly different than if you have a downhill bike. For example, an XC tire can weigh high 600s to mid 700 grams, up to 800. But a downhill tire could be upwards of 1,400 grams.
And how come there's such a difference?
One of the main differences is the casing construction. Also, the tread height and design plays a role, but casing is the big difference. XC casings are intended to be light, fast rolling, low rolling resistance, quick accelerating, whereas a downhill tire is more focused on durability, sidewall support, all-out grip, and damping.
Can you give me a better understanding of the different casing?
Yeah, so most brands have casings ranging from XC to light trail, trail, enduro, and downhill in some form. For Maxxis, we have our cross-country tires. That's going to be our 170 and 120 TPI EXO. And then for light trail, we have EXO, which is 60 TPI with sidewall protection. For more aggressive trail riding, we have EXO Plus. That is the same as EXO, but it has a butyl apex that sits above the bead, provides a little pinch flat protection and a little sidewall support. And then moving up into enduro or light e-bikes, we have Double Down, which is a dual ply 120 TPI casing that also has a butyl apex. This one's a little bit taller and a little bit harder, gives you a little bit more sidewall support. Moving into downhill or heavy e-bikes, we have the aptly named downhill casing. This is going to provide the most sidewall support and the most pinch flat protection. We just have a new downhill casing released at Crankworks. It is a dual ply 120 TPI, features the EXO sidewall protection and our stiffest butyl apex. This provides a very progressive stiffness casing that provides you a high level of sidewall support and pinch flat protection while still giving you a grippy, supple contact patch.
Okay, perfect. That just made me realize there's one thing we forgot to mention, which is, first of all, knowing which diameter of wheel you have. Obviously, there's different sizes ranging from kid sizes to 26, 27.5, 29, and now 32-inch wheel. Now, if we look again at the casing, you mentioned the Double Down. To simplify stuff, So double down is basically you're in between a heavy downhill tire and a lightweight cross-country setup. It is what I believe most people should be riding on analog bikes whenever they visit Squamish or ride world-class places such as Sedona, Moab, around Washington and the trails in Europe. It is basically a tire that's gonna offer you great protection for flats, cuts, good support when you start going a bit faster, good performance when you go downhill, and also a lighter feel when you pedal uphill. Can you tell us about the different designs, the different treads?
Yeah. Choosing the right tread pattern is really dependent on where you're riding. Two main factors you want to consider are the knob height of the tread pattern and as well as how tightly or loosely packed the tread pattern is. If you are in hard conditions or rocky conditions, typically you can get away with a lower knob height and a closer packed tread pattern. But if you ride somewhere that's soft, be that loamy, dusty, or wet or mixed, typically you want a taller and looser packed tread pattern. And if you are somewhere in between, choose an intermediate height and intermediate packed tread pattern.
When I choose the right tire and the right tread for me, should I go for a different front and rear tire? Can I ride the same tire front and rear? That's a question that comes back often. Like, do I have a different need on the front wheels than the rear wheel? Like, can you explain me?
Yeah, the physics of the front tire and the rear tire are different. The loading case is quite different. Typically on the front, you want something that has a high ultimate grip. And many people want a tire that has a smooth transition. That typically comes down to the gap between the center and the side knobs. The Assegai has a famous consistent transition.
And that's why you design those little knobs
Exactly.
every so often.
Yeah, those help prevent like a big gap between your center and your side knobs when you are committing to a turn. The DHX also has a very smooth transition from center to side knobs. So front, again, is more oriented around ultimate grip. Rear is a little bit different because you can get away with sliding your rear tire where you typically don't want to slide your front. So you're going to choose your rear tire typically based more on rolling speed and braking performance. Our most popular trail enduro downhill rear tire is the DHR2. It's quite fast rolling, has lots of braking surface area, and that transition gap doesn't quite matter because you are not directly inputting leaning or steering inputs into your rear tire. That's your front tire. The DHX is also quite a popular rear tire, multiple wins on the DHX in the World Cup circuit as a rear.
So you talked about front and rear tire. You mentioned that often you slide the rear wheel. That means that rear tire technically is going to wear out quicker. Also, when you pedal, all the forces go to the rear wheel. What does that mean in terms of choosing the right compound? Because Maxxis has a few compounds. Can you explain us a little bit how that works and the different options?
Yeah, if you're in the trail to downhill category of riding for Maxxis, we have dual compound, we have Max Terra, and we have Max Grip. Dual is the hardest, fastest rolling, and most durable. Max Terra is kind of the all-around compound, balancing grip, durability, and rolling speed. And then Max Grip, as the name suggests, is the grippiest, but has the fastest wear rate and the highest rolling resistance.
So I assume all the World Cup racers run Max Grip because they want the maximum performance, and obviously they can change the tire whenever they want. But if I wanted a tire that's gonna last longer, especially on the rear where the traction is not as key as on the front wheel, you can basically get away with a stiffer compound, so Max Terra or Dual.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Generally, if you live in a wet area or have lots of super smooth rocks or roots, you'd want a Max Grip front because that's where the benefits of Max Grip are going to be the most apparent in that increased grip. But if you're in a typically dry climate, then the softness of the tire isn't going to be as critical. It's going to come down to the tread pattern and the knob height. So you can get away with a Max Terra option that is going to roll a little bit quicker and last a little bit longer.
How much the temperature affect the compound? Because I think for people pretty new to mountain biking but who follow Formula One, they probably have a sense of how the temperature can affect how the bike rides. What can you tell us about the effect of basically the temperature on the knobs?
Yeah. In cold weather riding, the knobs generally get harder and the compounds get less effective. That is a difficult situation. We don't really advise using the tires in sub-freezing conditions. That can affect the durability. But in high heat situations, you can get into the point where our ultra soft max grip compound can be struggling for stability, because as it gets hot, the knobs lose some stiffness, the compound gets softer, and either go with a high stability tread pattern if you're in downhill or enduro like the DHX, that will help that knob flex, or you can move to a stiffer compound to help alleviate that. But again, those are in extreme hot conditions. Our max grip generally has quite a wide operating window of temperatures.
Does the weight of a person affect which compound they should choose?
Typically not to a huge degree. If you, again, live in an area that is grip starved, that typically has wet or mixed conditions or challenging surfaces, like a lot of smooth roots or rocks, I would generally advise to stick to a max grip. But if you are, like, let's say, a really large person on an e-bike in basically bike park conditions where you are cornering quite hard in like smooth manicured high grip berms, then perhaps a Max Terra would serve your purposes best.
So jumping back to the casing, the weight of the rider, I assume, affects which casing they should be on. I mean, of course, Jackson Goldstone is a lightweight, still runs a downhill casing. He will not be able to ride as fast as he does on a lighter casing. But let's say a trail rider that's around 100 kilos, would you recommend them being on the lighter casing like the Exo Plus or even a double down, or do you think they would get more benefit from running a stiffer casing?
Yeah, there are of course outliers on either end of the weight spectrum. If you are very light and don't typically have a lot of issues with flats or rim hits, or even just live in an area that doesn't have a lot of sharp rocks or large roots or big drops or compressions, you can get away with running a lighter casing. And the other end of the spectrum, if you are quite heavy, then perhaps you will have to essentially scale up your casing choice, go from something like an Exo Plus that your friend could be riding that's a few pounds lighter, a few kilos lighter, and go to a more robust supportive casing option. And that's also true if you live in an area that has lots of sharp or square edge rocks, big compressions, high load corners. If you find yourself riding in those areas a lot, or if you have issues with rim or tire durability, I definitely suggest moving to a more robust casing.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like a lot of people confound or misunderstand the difference between a gnarly trail and a rough trail. Sometimes you can have a trail that looks very impressive because it's really steep, it's got large feature, but the ground is actually really smooth, there is no sharp edges, and then you can find trails that are looking very easy, but they're pretty high speed and the rocks are really sharp, therefore they are a lot more damaging to the tires, but also the wheels. So that's also something to take in consideration when choosing the right tire. Before we talk about tire pressure, should I run tubes? Should I run an insert? Should I go tubeless? What is the general idea with modern mountain bike tires?
Yeah, unless you are riding in very specific categories like BMX, trials, freeride, I would generally suggest that everyone run tubeless. Lots of benefits, lower rolling resistance, lower weight, less chance of pinch flatting. So definitely tubeless for the vast majority of people. In regards to inserts, unless you have issues with denting or dinging aluminum rims or pinch flatting a lot of tires, I would generally steer away from inserts. But again, if you're going through a lot of rear wheels or tires, inserts might be for you.
And once again, if you have picked up the right casing for you and you've got the correct tire pressures that we're about to talk about, you are less likely to have those mechanicals. But as we'll see later, when you're trying to push the performance, for example, World Cup racer, putting everything on the line to have the fastest time on a track, you obviously taking chances to perhaps have some mechanicals. So that's a conversation we're gonna have in regards to finding the right tire pressure. This video is brought to you by my friends at Jenson USA. They sell most mountain biking products you will need, and they have been a great support of this YouTube channel for the past few years. Actually, they sell the entire lineup of Maxxis tires, including very soon the all-new DHX. This is an aggressive tire for dry condition. It has become my go-to setup front and rear for the Whistler bike park when it's very dry. I like how comfortable the bike is. The grip feels very predictable and the bike is very stable. So make sure you check them out. I'm gonna put a link down below. Before we tell you what tire pressure you want to be using on your bike, the first thing you want to do is get a good tire pressure gauge. This is actually a digital pump that also acts as a tire pressure. I can use it to simply check my tire pressure or inflate the tire to a certain tire pressure. And one thing I should say is you want to be using the same tire pressure gauge when you set up your bike, because different pressure gauge can read different pressure, which obviously will affect how your bike is going to be riding. So talking about tire pressure, does the tire pressure vary depending on the casing you are using?
Yeah, definitely. Let's say if you're riding the same trail at the same speed on the same bike and you're using XO Plus, you're going to have to use a higher tire pressure than if you're running the new downhill casing. That's because the XO Plus casing is a little bit lighter, a little bit less supportive, again, more geared towards rolling resistance. So if you're having a lot of fast descents, you're going to have to run a higher pressure for either rim out protection or sidewall support. Whereas on the downhill tire is more inherent stiffness and support in the casing, you're able to get away with a little bit lower pressure.
Okay, so now can you explain us, if I run too low of a tire pressure, what's going to happen to my feeling on the bike?
Yeah, generally if you're running too low of tire pressure, you are going to feel, let's say if you have a lot of, again, high load corners, like hard packed berms that you can really put a lot of load into the tire, you'll feel the casing deform and squirm. And if you are, let's say, pushing off a jump, you might feel the tire again squirm or deform or hit the rim. If you're going over a lot of like high speed chatter, you might feel a rock or a root impact, fully compress the tire and feel your rim hit the trail or the obstacle. And if you are in like a pedal intensive light trail or XC, your tire might feel a little slow. You might feel your tire bobbing as you're inputting pedal forces.
So obviously you'll run into reliability as well. As you mentioned, you're gonna hit the rim. Most of the time, if you do break or damage a rim, especially the newer wheels being stronger than ever, it's gonna be because your tire fully deformed and the rim essentially hits the ground. I think that's the biggest cause of damage for anybody, whether you are on aluminum or carbon wheels. So to avoid that, some people put a lot of PSI, but what happens when your tires are too firm?
Yeah, in general, if your tires are over pressurized to a significant degree, you'll feel a lot of high frequency vibrations. The tire will feel quite harsh. You'll feel that through your hands or through your feet. You'll feel overly fatigued. You'll have a lot of feelings of the tire bouncing and deflecting off of trail obstacles. And generally your grip will be significantly less than if you were running at the optimal pressure.
It's interesting you say that, because I just did a few videos with Steve Matthews from Vorsprung Suspension, and he mentions that the biggest complaint people have about suspension is harshness. And he said the first thing you want to be looking at is not actually your suspension, but it's your tire pressure, and it's starting with obviously the right casing, but the right tire pressure. So if we look at downhill tires and downhill casing, you've been working with some of the world's best teams, the fastest rider, including Jackson Goldstone, Lucas Shaw. What tire pressure do these riders run on a World Cup track?
Yeah, it varies rider to rider. It also varies in conditions. So a dry track, they'll run higher pressure. Also, depends track to track. High load track, they'll run a little bit higher pressure. And if there are not so many G-outs or not so many hard corners or really treacherous rocks or roots, maybe they'll run lower pressure. Generally, the vast majority of our downhill pros are running between like 21 and 24 or 25 PSI front, and then 23 and 28 PSI rear.
And I noticed, because myself I've been riding the new DHX with the new casing, and compared to the, I guess, older version of the downhill casing tire, I was able to run much less PSI because the tires got a lot more support. I was able to go down to 22 PSI on the front and around 25 PSI on the rear, where typically in the Whistler Bike Park on my downhill bike I'll run 28 PSI on the front, sometimes 24, and around 28 to 29 PSI on the rear. So I felt like quite some difference. But now if I look at the trail bikes I've been using with a double down tire, I typically run lower PSI. In Squamish, often I'm at 20, 21 PSI on the front wheel, around 22, 23 PSI on the rear wheel. But if I travel to places who have faster trail and very sharp rocks, often I have to go with the same bike, same casing to more PSI. So in Moab, where there is very, very sharp edges to prevent damages to the rim or pinch flat or even tear to the tire, I typically go a little bit higher, so 24, 25 PSI on the rear and around 22, 23 PSI on the front wheel. How about e-bikes? The bike being heavier, does that change how much tire pressure you should be running?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're running a full power e-bike and you want to stay on the same casings that you normally run, I would suggest potentially 2 PSI increase in the front and then 2 to 4 PSI increase in the rear. Or you can consider using an insert front and rear or just on the rear. Or again, perhaps moving to a more robust casing.
Yeah, in my case, on my two e-bikes, so the one with the TQ motor, which is a lightweight e-bike, or the Icano 3 with the Avinox motor, which is a full power e-bike and therefore heavier, I run downhill casing. Why? Because I feel like the added performance compared to a double down is fairly significant once you start going fast. You get more reliability, and obviously the weight on the e-bike is not that much of a criteria for myself at least. I want the best performance to go downhill, but also the best reliability. So I go downhill casing, but I still run higher PSI than I would on a similar bike with the same amount of travel on the same trail, but without the motor. So let's say on my propane tie, which would be essentially the equivalent of the Schweich SL, I'll be running with the same casing, actually much less PSI. The bike being lighter, I feel like there is much less forces going through the compression, the corner, and when I get to rougher terrain, the bike being lighter, I'm less likely to hit the rim and potentially cause the damage to it. So on the e-bike, I've been going all the way up to 24 on the front, 26 PSI on the rear with downhill casing tire, just to avoid the tire to flex too much or to avoid any type of damage. Before we wrap up the video, I wanted to share a little thought that I have about tires in general. This is my Propane Spindrift, probably the bike I use the most. Right now I have a set of downhill casing tire, Asagai front, DHR2 on the bike. It's kind of my go-to setup. If I had to ride this bike, let's say around Sedona or Moab, I have to do some long pedaling days, and I'm not necessarily looking for the most performance when going downhill, and I just want to save some energy for the uphill. I'll be looking at changing for Exo Plus front and a double down rear, and that will completely transform the bike. That'll make the bike feel a lot lighter, a lot more playful. At the same time though, I will have to pick up smoother lines. I will have to be more mindful on how I approach rock gardens or big compression. But what I want to say with that is that you can completely transform a bike by changing the tire category you have on it. So if you want to impress your friends on the downhill, a good way to cheat is essentially to put a set of downhill casing tires on your bike with some 3C grip, some soft rubber, and that's really gonna elevate your skill, elevate your speed, and really how much confidence you're gonna get on the downhill. And at the contrary, if you want to impress your friends with your fitness, get something like a D-Sector. It's a faster rolling tire compared to a DHR2 or an Asagai. And yes, you're gonna be losing a little bit of speed on the downhill, but on the uphill, it's gonna make a very noticeable difference. Thanks for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment below what's your tire of choice and what PSI you run. As always, you can subscribe to the channel, leave me a like, comment. Check out the link down below to Jenson USA to purchase your Maxxis tires, and I'll see you next week. Okay, I think that's
perfect. Good.